Welcome to the Alternate Eligible Content Advanced Essentialization Winter Series 2018. Today's presentation is entitled Making Alternate Eligible Content Meaningful for Students with the Most Significant Cognitive Disabilities. If you are new to alternate eligible content and essentialization, you may want to visit our patent website, www.patent.net. Click on the Educational Initiatives tab and choose the initiative Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities. On the right-hand side of this page, you will see a selection for previously viewed webinars. Click on this and you will find basic introductions and information regarding alternate eligible content and essentialization. Let's get started. Alternate eligible content and the resources are coming through leadership at the patent office. Today's outcomes, understanding the alternate eligible content, least complex content targets, we're going to be looking at some basic information in regard to 4 components. We will be looking first at communication and establishing this to find if there is a consistent way that your student is providing information to you. So how does your student communicate? How do they take information in? And how do they share information out? And then what makes the content meaningful? Identify how to think about the relevance of the alternate eligible content for your individual students. What might make it relevant for one student may look different for another, and we recognize that. We're going to also be providing examples of using our alternate eligible content in TENS, which is a great resource. We also are going to be challenging you today to think in concepts, think broadly. Use the essentialization process and examples, and we're going to reduce the learning to broad concepts. We're going to give you samples of concepts today, but you may come up with some things that are equally valuable and meaningful for your students. We're also going to be looking at some resources and pointing out resources along the way that will assist you with understanding the alternate eligible content and with staying aligned to the alternate eligible content and making the alternate eligible content relevant. All of the resources that we referenced today can be found you're going to see them in a bright yellow star, are found on the patent webpage, as we indicated in that first slide, www.patent.net. Go to the Initiative tab and select the initiative Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities. And you will find on the right a menu box where you can locate all of these pieces of information to use. We're going to start this presentation with a common understanding. This particular presentation is designed especially and focuses especially on students who are eligible for the PASA, but who will access the alternate eligible content at its very least complex level. Our common understanding is that all students are learners. So take a minute and think about the students in your classroom. The students who access or will access the alternate eligible content at that least complex level. Regardless of ability and abilities that our students bring to us in our classrooms, we're going to talk today about ways to make this content meaningful and accessible. We're going to talk about ways the content can enlighten and enhance your students' relationships, interactions, and participation. Even if it's partial participation, when we think about lifelong goals and the quality of a person's life and how it can be enhanced in so many ways. So the ways that we can enhance life and the way quality can be impacted as we learn along the way. It impacts our interactions and relationships with people and things. It impacts our ability to control what's happening. It impacts our ability to make choices. So as we learn and we think about ways that that enhances our life and the quality of our life, take a minute and think about some other ways that the quality of your student's life could be enhanced. If you're watching as a group, pause the presentation and take a few minutes to discuss this and discuss this common understanding that all students are learners. If you're watching by yourself, take a minute to reflect on this and think of some ways that your student's life is enhanced or could be impacted through things that your student is learning. So we're going to jump right in with communication and learning. Communication is powerful. Communication and learning are intricately intertwined. How we take information in and how we show what we know are huge pieces for consideration and can be as diverse and unique to our individual students as our students are themselves. So what you're looking at are some samples of some ways that students take information in. But your students probably use a myriad of ways to communicate. And as we think about learning alternate eligible content, it's going to be critical to think about how that communication occurs for each and every one of your students. So what does communication mean? Having a way to communicate is a basic need. Some basic tenets of effective communication is why and when to communicate. We communicate to get basic needs met. We communicate at appropriate times to get other needs met, whether it's for social, for work, for interacting with family. Controlling the communication is effective to meet one's needs, and that's part of the goal. So it's really important that our students understand that communication is important, and then when and how and why we communicate. We also want our students to understand that communication is an exchange of some sort that involves more than one, and it's another goal or underlying understanding with communication. So we want our students to understand that if they're gesturing or looking towards something in the room and we pick it up and give it to them, we've now engaged in a communication exchange with them. But we need to meet our students where they are with their communication. We recognize students are all different, various ways or levels of communication. Sometimes we have folks who say, my student doesn't really communicate. There's no way I can assess them. I could try to teach them, but I can't find out what they know. So we strongly urge you to think about becoming involved in some informal observations across environments and partners to capture what your student's doing. Use video, use observer notes, no matter what it is, a noise, a movement, a gesture, eye shift, anything in a variety of situations. Note the partners who are around. That's why videoing it is really exciting. Note the partners who are around and others around the student and their response. Look for patterns and responses, even things that might not be conventional, and start seeing things that look the same across environments. This is the start of shaping responses that can lead to a student being able to indicate some things for us and respond when we're instructing using alternate eligible content. One of the researchers and folks in the field out of the University of Kentucky is Jacqueline Kearns, who's done a lot of work around communication. And there is a communication toolkit. It's one of many, many free tools or tools that are out there that can start that consideration of shaping communication responses. So I have a link for it on this webinar, so you can go out there and just get that. I would also strongly recommend touching base with the speech language therapist that may support students in your classroom for additional ideas and additional ways just to start shaping responses. So let's take a quick second, pause the webinar, and talk with your neighbor if you're in a group, or if you're by yourself, just jot down a couple different ways your students are communicating in your classroom. And when you're done, restart the webinar. Let's see if you've captured any of these ideas. Does your student communicate with noises, whether they're intentional or unintentional? Do they use gestures with their arms or their legs or their heads or their shoulders? Do they use any kind of movement? Because every movement counts. Do you see changes in body posture, eye shift, even behavior? When a student starts or stops being aggressive when you're instructing them, that can also be a tool of communication. Does your student use any words? Some sign language? Do they use objects or pictures to select and communicate? Or is there something else? I'm going to ask you to revisit this now that we've talked about some ways to think about students communicating. Is there something that you talked about that you're seeing here? Is there something different? Pause, check with your group, and have a little bit of a reflection on that, and then come back to us. The teacher role is critical. When we think about communication and we think about instructing alternate eligible content and how we're providing information to our students and how they're taking it in, we need to be really thinking about some of these tips. Use language that's already familiar or common for the student. Consider concept learning versus vocabulary acquisition, particularly when you get into the upper grades or you're in some of the science alternate eligible content. There's vocabulary that is very, very complex. But think about ways that your student can acquire that vocabulary. Don't teach more words than they need to teach the concept. Change your language to meet their language. If they're not understanding, step back and rephrase and make sure that you're phrasing it in a way that they understand. Here's some more. Consider the words that come up most often with the conceptual learning of the alternate eligible content. Concepts of more, same, different, description words, put together, take away. What are the phrases that make sense and that your student responds to? Because sometimes it is the language that we're using. It's not that the student doesn't know or can't show, it's how we're asking. Consider using supports that ensure comprehension, supports that are familiar to the student, objects, gestural, pictures, physical. Some additional tips around communication. Think about how questions or directives are phrased. Are you using familiar language? Are you asking the question or giving the directive in terms understandable for the student? We as teachers, myself included, often use lots and lots of language, and our students may or may not be able to follow and hold on to everything we are saying. It's not saying we make it more challenging or reduce it all the time, but you need to specifically look at the situation and make some sense out of it. So here's an example. In math, say you're doing a data interpretation and you have a nice little graph with flowers on it. You could say to the student, oh, here are 2 sets of pictures of beautiful flowers. Aren't they pretty? There are yellow ones and pink ones, and look, they have green stems and leaves. Can you see them? I want you to show me which one has more than the other. So by the time you get all that language out, that may have, as your student's trying to process and think about what you said about the flowers, what you're trying to get is trying to get them to tell you which is more, and they may not get there. You've now made, through your communication, some things that might be more complex. So you could offer, touch the 2 sets of flowers in front of them, or have them touch them with you. Say, here are yellow flowers and here are pink flowers. Touch more. Which one is likely to get you to whether the student understands what it is that you're asking? Here's some more tips. The last one that we have around communication. I want you to find a word or a prompt that works best for your student. Show me more, find. Some students are able to answer what, when, direct questions. When we get into the why and how, we're getting to inferencing, which tends to be more abstract. So just to keep that, not saying you can't use that or shouldn't use that, but these are just some pieces of information that can help you as you think about communication of your student, showing and sharing what they know, and how they're taking information in, and how your instruction impacts that. The next piece we're going to talk about is meaningfulness and learning. So what makes content meaningful for your student? Think about this question in context of yourself. So when you kick back and if in the evening or on the weekend and you want to choose to watch some TV or go to a movie, what do you choose to watch, or you want to go outside and do something? What impacts your choices? What new information are you willing to learn? Typically, we are very comfortable and more familiar. The more familiar we are with something, the more background knowledge we bring, the more engaged and relevant the task is going to become to us. I'm willing to try something if maybe I've seen it somewhere. I may be more willing to watch something if I have some background knowledge about what it's about before I jump right in. So the same thing applies to our students, that when we teach new concepts, we don't need to teach new topics, new context, adding interest. Let's use what the student already knows and is interested in. Let's provide a context that is relevant to them. Let's think about what they already know. And once they master some skills and we want to shape that using something new as a new topic or new context, we can. But the rule of thumb when you're teaching alternate eligible content, particularly at the least complex level, to make it as meaningful as possible, you want to really ground yourself in what the student is already familiar in to teach this new concept. So in math, for example, we can use quantitative amounts that are familiar to the student. Or if you say, well, my student doesn't even understand quantitative amounts, then at the very least, we're going to start with the quantity of 1, because that's where we need to start. Do they understand what 1 is? And how can we get them to that place of embedded in the concept, but just using 1? or one and a whole bunch more and just say which is more, or which is one, which is smaller. So or which is small. You would use the familiar vocabulary for the student, and you will use the context that is familiar to them. So same thing with real world problems. Use things that affect the everyday life of your students, things that they can relate to. In English language arts, for example, you're going to want to use text that contains something familiar for the students, or it's about interests that your students share, things that you know kind of get your student going. So we're going to keep that in the back of our mind as we walk through these examples today. We're also going to challenge you. This is about thinking in concepts. We're teaching broad concepts for our students. It's more than just rote memorization of the content and regurgitating information. Using a calculator to plug in something which shows us maybe the student can touch a calculator and give us some kind of an answer, or show us that there's an answer. That's not what this is about. This is about manipulating, maybe stretching a little thinking, providing some more control for our students over their environment, and really getting to the content in a very broad way. So the alternate eligible content is intended to go deeper and broader for our students and provide long-term outcomes and learning that really, the question you want to ask is, how will this concept benefit my student 25 years from now? How's this, by learning this, how's this going to enhance their life 25 years from now? We're going to show you that through the examples coming up. So let's start with math. Here's our first math example. We're starting with grade 4, which is answer a question about data in a pictograph, line plot, or bar graph. Hey guys, this is one of our resources that's on our patent webpage. It's the Math Alternate Eligible Content Across the Grades with the Intent. If you've been on with us in previous webinars, you're going to know that the alternate eligible content has also a resource that goes with it where we put a broader statement about what that alternate eligible content wants the student to know and be able to do. In this case, the intent talks to us about using a graph to answer a question. Well, I can probably read the thought bubbles across the state as folks think about this, and you say, well, for the least complex content, I'm not so sure graphs are important. And that probably may be a good point to make. But let's think about, could a graph be considered information that we're providing, something in front of the student that can be touched, viewed, heard, and then the student has to kind of make some sense out of it, has to make some interpretation. Like, I'm going to ask them something about it, and I want them to kind of make a decision or make a choice about something that they're touching, viewing, hearing, interacting with. Would that be meaningful for your student? Is that something that if they can make sense out of something that's in front of them, or have some thought processes that help them make sense out of it, would that be meaningful? Is that a meaningful concept to be teaching a student, any student? Let's think about what ways this could positively impact your student now and in the future. So if you're in a group, I want you to pause this webinar and have a little conversation. If you're with a partner, I want you to talk with your partner and then come back to us. If you're by yourself viewing this, I want you to really thoughtfully take a little bit of time and think about it, and then come back. Based on thinking broadly about this piece of alternate eligible content, let's examine, and this is just a sample, you may phrase it differently, you may think about it differently, and that's okay as long as it still remains aligned to what the alternate eligible content is asking. But just for our work today, to kind of ground us in our example, let's say maybe the big, broad piece that comes out of this intent is really to interpret something provided in a graph, a chart. It's going to be simple, that a student can see or touch or hear. In this case, it's really going to be a greatly modified graph and answer a really simple modified question. So remember that circle where we're going to have to consider what's the student's interest, what are some familiar topics, what's relevant to teach. So we want them to interpret something. Let's have them interpret something that is meaningful to them, something they do every day, or something that they're involved with, or something that they have a really strong interest with, and something that they have a little prior knowledge, something that is meaningful. So, my friends, you have done coding in the past, and we've done it for you here, thinking about that piece of alternate eligible content and thinking about what we've learned in the past about coding and essentializing to help us come up with a target. What do students need to do in this particular, what do they need to know, in this particular piece of content? They need to know data, and data is, well, we'll talk about that. What do they need to do? They need to answer a question. And in what context? Well, they give us some latitude. It has to be in a pictograph, line, plot, or bar graph, whatever makes sense. So we want to reduce the complexity. We're talking about our students that need to access the content at the least complex level. So we definitely are essentializing. So what is that know? What is data? Well, it's something about what's in a graph or a plot. It's actually just organized information, and it's probably going to be something really touchable, something real, something, I can smell, or something I can touch and make sense out of, something I can see if I am able to do that. Whatever is the best way for the student to access that content. The way they're communicating, the way they're taking information in, the way they show what they know. What do we want them to do? We're going to have them touch. We're going to have them select from choices. The teacher can model. It doesn't have to be phrased in a question. The teacher can make it a directive so that the student can gather some information. And what's the context? Well, we're going to use a really simple chart with pictures, objects familiar to the student, relevant to the student, and tap into the prior knowledge of the student. I can't emphasize that enough. We want to make this real. And if we want to teach the concept, and for our students who are accessing this at the very least complex level, this is going to be challenging. I get it. It is going to be challenging, and it's going to be important for us as we shape this learning that we're using things that make sense to the student that they can relate to. So here's our example, and I am going to temper this with just saying this is a sample, based on knowledge about just one student, but your student could be completely different and you may want to use something different. That's okay. This is to give you ideas and to give you an idea of what it could look like. So our sample content target, if we're going to set this up to teach, we would probably have in our minds, we wouldn't have to write it down, but in the beginning, I would recommend you want to jot some stuff down so that you can think about using a simple chart to touch and select an answer related to the chart when given a question or a directive, such as find or show me. Now, of course, you would add in, the mastery criteria based upon your student. What would you consider success for them? if they can touch it with you, if they can touch it after they see you touch it, if they can touch it when given the directive, that they understand what they are asked to do. So that all has to come into play. So in this particular case, this scenario, this student is a student, student's interest, student loves things that move, anything that moves. Whether they're in something moving, whether something is moving in front of them, whether they can move something, love it. Some familiar topics, they respond to vehicles, objects, whether the vehicle's an object, sometimes they respond to pictures. Your student is going to be unique to you, and however they, that topic and how they interpret that familiar information. So when we thought about things that move and we were thinking, well, what's a relevant context around things that move? We don't need to artificially, bring anything in. We could if we wanted, but we want to make it relevant. So we know the student rides the bus almost every day to school, and it is the highlight of their life, of their day. So we're going to use that. So when we think, well, we're going to talk about data, we got to talk about amounts. Well, we know the student has some exposure to the calendar because it's done every day in the classroom. So not a whole lot of mastery. We're trying to acclimate them to the different days of the week. They do know their mom's car and they know the school bus. They have some experience. We've done some things with 1 and 2 quantities. And they have had some work with same and different. So we're getting some discrimination going with them. So that's kind of where we're starting with this particular student. So with that kind of information, we came up with an example for this particular piece. Now, of course, you would teach it, and you would get the student to the point where they can select. But these are some things, and you would, of course, once they learn it in one way, you may want to change the context, pick out something else that revolves around their interest, something else that's relevant. But we picked the bus. So how many times did you ride the bus on Tuesday? Well, we know the student rides the bus to school and home from school. Sometimes they ride the bus 3 times if we go out in the community and they get a bus for us. So there's a couple different ways. You could ask it as a question, how many times did you ride the bus on Tuesday? Or you could say, show me bus on Tuesday. Well, we put in our little chart there, and you're saying, well, Sharon, my students probably can't read those names. And that could be true, and I don't doubt that. You may have a different symbol or some other indicator that would help them know what that day of the week is. You could highlight it. There's nothing wrong with highlighting, and if the student can locate that on the chart and answer a question, it doesn't say they have to locate the pieces of the chart, but it's asking them to answer a question about the chart. So we could do that. We could also reduce how big the chart is. It doesn't have to be all 5 days of the week. It could be 2 days of the week. So there's lots of different ways that you can manipulate that. So you could say, show me bus on Tuesday. Teacher could model it. Student could do it right after them. So if you think about our across the grades document, this is what this is math, and when you're on our website, it's kind of a snapshot of looking at it on our website. And you see there's that 4th grade one. We're going to kind of walk across the grades and show you, using that same context, what that could look like for 5th grade, what it could look like for 6th grade, what it could look like for 7th grade. Okay, you ready? Okay, similar, same student in 5th grade, same interest, relevance, familiar topic, as well as prior knowledge. So this piece of content says interpret one set of data given in 2 different displays and show how 2 different graphs can show the same information. So again, we're interpreting information in a graph. We're asking, the concept is to interpret it in a little bit of a different way. So we have to show 2 different graphs and kind of make it a decision based on looking at both of them. So there's lots of different ways you could do it. You could have it already out there, or you could use pieces And you could either have the second graph already done or use pieces to have the student put the things on the graph. So we would have the 2 graphs, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I as the teacher could put it on, or we could have the student load it on. And then say if day 1 is Monday, do these graphs show the same information? Or say same, or these same, and the student can reply. Again, you can reduce the complexity of the graph to make it simpler for the student, and you can reduce the complexity even further. Here's a grade 6 example. Same kind of thing, only in grade 6, they're asking them to use the graph to identify what is same or different about 2 points on the graph. Again, student loves riding the bus, understands the bus. We know 1 and 2 is their kind of relative understanding, but they are doing same and different. We're working a little bit on more. But here's some things that you could do with this graph. Okay, so this is a chart, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a line plot. And in this particular graph, you could say, do you ride the bus more on day 3 or day 4? And I can imagine you saying, oh, my student could never find that. Well, we could highlight it for them, if that would help, using a color or a marker or something that makes it easier for them to understand. We can reduce the size of the graph. We're not asking them to count how many are on each one. That doesn't matter. We're not asking them anything about counting. But what we are asking them is show me more, teacher can model. Show me same, maybe 3 and 5. So they're really doing what the content's asking them to do, but it's around something that's going to be of high interest, relevance, and familiar. And what does that mean for them 25 years from now? Can they look at something and make a decision about what they're seeing? Show me more. Think about partial participation in an activity. Show me same. Being able to partially participate meaningfully post-secondary. You know, what are you going to do after school's done? Whether you're helping at home, or whether you're in a group home, or whether you're living in another home arrangement, or you're out on a job, you're going to be able to be part of what's going on. So here's grade 7, and this is identify what compare 2 sets of data within a single pictograph, line plot, or bar graph. So now we've got 2 sets of data. We know mom's car and the bus are what's familiar for the student. We're using three data points, but we're going to ask about on day 2, did you ride the bus more or the car more? That might be too much information. You could just highlight day 2 and say, show me more on day 2. Still might want to reduce it even more, so you are just looking at that point on the plot and say, show me more. Are they identifying what's different about the 2 different sets of data? Absolutely. Now we have the grade 8 example, which is along that same line that we just showed you. So compare 2 proportional relationships shown in graph form. We have another resource out on our patent website called Essentialized Examples. Talked about them a lot last year. Take a look at what could be available there, but this particular piece of content is fleshed out in grade 8 at 3 different levels of complexity, but at the least complex, what they're looking at is, on Friday, show me which plant is more. Show me the plant that is bigger on Friday. Show me big. You could also do as we did before and just show that piece of content. Here's what they look like on Monday. Here's what they look like on Friday. So we're going to ask them questions about the plant size and that relationship on that graph. So here's another math example. And this is a high school translate a real-world problem into a 1-variable equation. So we talked earlier about things being real world. So this piece of content doesn't ask the student to solve the problem, but to define and understand the problem. And they're asking it to be shown via an equation. So if you can understand what the problem is in a real world, or have some understanding simply of what a problem is, consider the possibilities of what kind of control that gives you over your environment. It does a little bit, because it starts getting you to become more aware of what's going on. Thinking through what the problem is, remember, this doesn't ask them to solve it, can begin the process for your student to develop more awareness of their environment and understanding what's happening. So here's the piece, here's the alternate eligible content. Here's your intent, where you take a real world situation and represent it as an equation. Here's my question. Could defining what is the problem, that's a problem that's relevant to the student, relevant to their world, be meaningful? And what ways could this positively impact your student now and in the future? This would be a good place to pause if you're a group and have a little discussion. Maybe talk about what that could mean for your student. If you're by yourself, you might want to jot down some things that you're thinking. Maybe pause us and then come right back. So what makes this problem meaningful for learning? So we're going to consider our student. This particular student has real high interest with superheroes and comics. Mom reports that they watch The Flash and Supergirl. Their relevant context is some TV time. And time in general, they've been working on time. It's high school for a lot of years. Basic understandings of the quantities of 1 and 2. And we know the family tells us this particular show is of very high interest each week, and it's 1 hour long. One is a good context for us to work with. So let's essentialize here. We're going to, what does the student need to know? Well, they need to know what a problem is. Like, this isn't going to work. They may react to a problem, but they may need to know what a problem is and what an equation is. And this piece of content wants them to translate it into, and they have to translate it, and they have to put it into something, and the context has to be real world and a one variable. So that means there has to be an unknown somewhere in this problem. And you're going, this has no meaning for my student. I couldn't possibly think how we could make this relevant. Well, we're going to give it a shot here. So when we manipulate these, we can manipulate any or all of these and change them or leave them as is, but we have to have all 3 of these pieces to be part of our content target. So what does the student need to know? They need to know something familiar and simple problem. We're going to use add or subtract based on the student prior knowledge. And the equation we're going to set up will use no more than quantities of 2. And the student doesn't necessarily know what add and subtract is. They know they can put things together and they can take things apart, take away. So what are we going to have them do? We're going to have them select from choices. They don't have to solve it. They just have to figure out what a real world problem is. Like, take a situation and make it kind of set it up to help them think it through. And we want them to select from choices that are represented in a way that makes sense to the student. Context, it's got to be relevant. And we're going to make that missing variable is going to be the solution. We're not doing something in the middle, something, the missing variable is going to be what the student would need to figure out to solve for. So here's our sample content target. So we're going to use a relevant problem, amounts no greater than 2, and the missing variable is the solution. We're going to select a statement that represents the problem. And again, you would need to set up the mastery criteria for your student. So here you go. So here's the problem. You watch the flash for 2 hours or 2 times each week. This week, 1 hour, 1 time, it's not on. It's not going to be on. How many times are you going to watch the flash this week? Show me the problem. So here's the first choice. Here's the flash. Now you can put 1 hour under it. You don't have to. Could be part of what's provided to the student. Minus 1 hour is Supergirl. Does that tell us what the problem is? Or is it that we watch Flash 2 hours or 2 times, and that 1 hour we're going to take away 1 time? We always watch it 2 times each week. This week, we're going to take away once. So how many? So which one represents this problem that I have or the student has? Again, these can be manipulatives. These can be things a child can touch, can hear, can see, something that represents the hero, that helps them understand how to set up the problem and how to think it through. So if this is happening, and you're able to set this up, and the student, you can get a student to kind of understand how to figure out what's happening. How can that impact their life? How can that impact their understanding of situations that maybe they don't totally understand, but if we could find a way to represent it differently, would it help them understand and feel more in control of their environment and their life? If you're watching as a group or with a partner, pause, discuss this math example and the ones we just saw. And if you're watching by yourself, take a minute and jot down some ideas that you just learned about math examples. Okay, we're going to finish up today looking at some English language arts reading examples. Ta-da! We have another resource in addition to math. We have the English language arts alternate eligible content across the grades with intent up on our website. And I can tell you in the near future we will have the writing alternate eligible content across the grades with intent up on our website. And we are currently working on the science. So, back to ELA, and we're going to look at literature here first. In this piece of literature, the student's going to be asked to identify similarities or differences in the multimedia version or other interpretation of a story and the written story. So basically, the intent is telling us find the things that are the same or things that are different between seeing a multimedia version and its text version. So thinking about this intent, how does it help us think more broadly? Could finding things that are same and different of a familiar story or topic presented in several entertaining ways potentially raise an awareness level for your student? Would this be meaningful? In what ways could it positively impact your student now and in the future? Take a minute, share with a partner, or jot it down and then come back to us. Okay, we're going to think about concepts. Conceptual learning can be deeper learning for students interacting with content at the least complex level. The goal is not to memorize the story or text facts, though we want students to enjoy learning and hearing the story and remembering. But we want to increase the student's ability to make meaning of what is being heard, seen, touched. And by doing that, it is going to help them be able to remember and relate to the story. So we're going to examine this intent first. That's going to support us with designing the content target. We're going to code it. We're going to think about that concept. So we talked about demonstrating awareness of something that is the same or different between 2 versions of a story. We'll select the text based on the student's interest. some familiar topics, relevant context, prior knowledge. Those are all going to help us do something that's going to make meaning for the student. So our coders, here you go. What do we need to know? Similarities or differences. What do we have to do? Identify, and in what context? A multimedia version or other interpretation of the story. So obviously we have to reduce complexity. We need to know what is same, what is different, or what is different. There's an or in there. What do we have to do? We're going to touch or select from choices. Teacher can model, from teacher directive or question. And we need to have two versions of the same story greatly modified. Specific scenes selected. So our sample content target, we're going to use two greatly modified versions of a story and select from choices. We can use pictures, objects, sounds, what works for the student. In this case, we're going to do with what is the same. So let's think about the student here. In this particular case, student's interest, splashing in water, listening to music. The student likes water, fish, and music. We know the student spends some time near the water with the family every year. And the student likes to watch movies. So that's going to give us that's going to help us say, oh, maybe we'll use a movie version. Prior knowledge, we know they know big, little, understand same, different. There's so much more we could probably put in there, but for time. This is what was selected as text for the student, Moby Dick. Has water, it has fish, has big. So those are some things. The text examples I have up there are from Retopia. Retopia, it has an adapted version, but unfortunately you do have to buy the lit series. We also have a free version that I found out on the web, and you can also go out and search. It's the Sherlock Center. They do use pictures to support the text, and that may or may not be supportive for your student. It's not always the best way for the student to gain sense of what's going on. But I will tell you, it is a reduced complexity of the story that could help you to think about other ways that you could reduce the text if you needed to reduce the text further, or to adapt the text for your student. And it's free. So you can go out there and look at it, and for nothing else, it can give you ideas. And I have the link for both of those resources there. So here's some media versions. Heart of the Sea, it's probably the most recent version that reflects the Moby Dick story. You have the 1956 version, which is like out there on YouTube. That's free. And then there's a TV miniseries, so of course that's already chunked up for you. But you can watch it in its entirety. You could chunk it up. You could read the part of the story, watch the part of the movie that goes with it, and really think about what you're going to target that's going to be the same. So you want to identify some areas of focus for same and different. And these could be really simple, broad comparisons. Like there's a whale's a big fish is in both of them. Water is in both. So the student likes splashing in water. Could even have water as a choice, Wouldn't have to be a picture of water. Have the water there. If there's a captain, it depends on the complexity of your student and what the kind of information, the person in charge of the boat. There's a boat in both of them. You could have that. Whatever is relevant to your student. A difference, one has pictures you can see and hear, and one has words that make the pictures in our head. It doesn't necessarily have the pictures in the book, but some of them do have pictures that are in the book. One of them, it's moving. There's different ways you can relate it to your student, but that's really going to be based on your student and what's going to make sense for your individual students in your class. So using manipulatives, have the student show what is the same between the versions. So show same, you could have a chart up, you could have pictures they can manipulate. You could have objects. You could have the water right there. In this case, we put a bathtub in there because the bathtub has water, but it's not in the story. So it would be definitely a choice that wouldn't be same between both of them. You could use something completely unrelated. You can make it as easy or, as complex or less complex as you need to meet your students' needs, to make it challenging and meaningful. Here are some other suggested high school literature that have corresponding media versions that you can probably find adapted versions out there. Thanks to Ann Sheffer at Dover School District. Gave us some of these ideas based on what she knows her kids like in high school, and she's actually a high school English teacher. West Side Story, The Great Gatsby. We have The Great Gatsby's in one of our previous webinars, some reduced versions and some ideas of how to think about that with the different themes that are going on. Raisin in the Sun. Remember, this is secondary, so we have to make sure that we keep this or a high school relative. Our second piece or example in ELA, and we're going to think about meaningfulness and learning. This is a piece of informational text, so we're going to switch to a different piece of text. This is 8th grade. Identify an argument or claim that an author makes. And the intent is really to find an opinion the author is trying to convey. So the question is, I don't know if my student could really understand what an opinion or what an author is trying to tell you. So what is it that we really want the student to do? What is the broad concept here? Could understanding a big idea of what the article is saying potentially raise the ability for your student to demonstrate focus on what's being said or stated? Would this be meaningful for your student? What's it all about? Because when an author is trying to make an argument or claim, it's going to be the focus. It's going to be the important thought of what's happening in this piece of text. Think about what ways this could positively impact your student now and in the future. This would be a great place to pause and have a conversation and think about argument and opinion, and think about how important it is for a student to maybe be aware of something going on like that, aware of what's happening in a piece of text or even when people are talking. And then come on back to us. So, examining the intent of the AUC first. What's the author trying to convey? What's that opinion that's going on? So the concept, demonstrate focus on what the author is saying and wanting you to know. What's the big idea, the big thought that they really are finding to be important for you to pay attention to? So we're going to probably select our text, again, based on student interest, familiar topics, relevant context, prior knowledge. If we're going to code it, our coders probably have already done this. What do the student need to know? An argument or a claim. What do they need to do with it? They need to identify. And the context is what the author's making or what the author's saying. So it's the person writing it. So we're going to have to reduce complexity, most certainly. So what does the student need to know? The big idea, the important thought. It's really more than just the general idea of it. It's what's that important thought that the author wants you to know? What can the student do with it? Well, they can touch and select from choices. Teacher can model from a teacher directive, a question. And the context, it's what the author wants you to understand. It's what the author really wants you to know about this text. So a sample content target using greatly modified informational text that contains a clear author claim or argument, their big idea, their important thought. Select from choices, pictures, objects, sounds, whatever it is that the author is claiming or arguing. So thinking about our student, and we actually had gone out and looked at some informational text, but we know our student is interested in drawing, looking at pictures. It's mostly scribbling. They like it seems to grab their attention. Colors, really drawn to colors, different colors. Relevant context, pictures, drawing. They like to watch others draw. They like to try to draw. Some prior knowledge. Well, they know a little bit about drawing. They know a little bit about art, identifying some colors. They are really drawn to colors. They understand a little bit about what buildings are. In this case, maybe the student lives in the city. And this particular article is going to talk about drawings on buildings. And so we would need some skill of shaping that they clearly understand what the structure of our building is. We know they've seen drawings on buildings during their bus route to school. And so particularly kids in the city. And in rural settings, they draw on barns. There's pictures all over the place, all across our state. So this piece of context, informational text, was a great one in regard to thinking about claim or argument, and it's about graffiti, which we know would probably be a very complex vocabulary word. So just our pictures, drawings on buildings, good or bad. You can reduce the complexity. We always encourage pairing the original text with whatever you adapt. You adapt it to adjust for understanding and comprehension for the student and what you're trying to teach them, the concept within the alternate eligible content. However, it doesn't preclude you from sharing that original version with them. So in this case, it comes from News ELA, free resource. Many of you probably already use it. You may have used this particular article. That would be awesome. You can reduce the word count. This was, we reduced the word count. It got it down to a grade level of 3. But we're not paying attention for this because when we went in and searched, we searched 8th grade and we searched for a claim, and this is what we came, and the Lexile, of course, was much greater, which put it at an 8th grade level. Because we reduced the Lexile, that helped us to modify it even further. So we really took some of the pictures right in that article and reduced the complexity for our students. This is just a sample, very sample modified text. You could even reduce this complexity further, but we reduced it to what you're seeing on the screen. I'm not going to read it to you, but we really kind of took those big ideas and kind of really took that author's idea that it's part of our city or town. People, they talk about people being arrested, people getting having to go to court because of it, and that it's happening everywhere, and we should just appreciate the art. So if there's a graffiti or something near you in your town or your city, you could take a picture of that, put it in the story. That would be awesome. And add it to help them understand what the author's trying to say about art. And we know it's going to draw the attention of our student because they like color and art and drawings. So, but again, it's one sample. So we really, where they talked about in this article about an example of how we reduce the complexity, they talked about in the article people get arrested and they go to court, and so we just reduced it to some people think people who draw on buildings are bad. So you can even reduce it. People, you don't even have to say some people think. You could say people who draw on buildings are bad. You can reduce it. However, it's going to help your student understand it. That's the best way to kind of talk to you about adapting it. So if you wanted to kind of work towards something or use some kind of array of things, it's easy to find free available pictures out online that give you ideas of what graffiti are. There are actually 2 correct answers here. Show me what the story writer says or claims is good. We're actually putting the claim in the directive. You can switch that around somehow. The two answers, of course, would be the pictures of the actual drawings on the sides of buildings. This is a more challenging discrimination because the third picture there is actually art on a building, but it's not a drawing. You can reduce the complexity even further if you had a picture of something that wasn't related at all. You could have it if you only wanted to have one correct answer and two that wouldn't be correct. That would help you to show that your students understand that the article is saying that this drawing on buildings is good. So that is our ELA example, and that actually brings us to the very end of this presentation. Here are today's outcomes. We talked about communication, meaningfulness, thinking in concepts. These are the big ideas we want you to take away. And we pointed out some resources that will help you. Please go to our website and take part in looking at some of the resources that can help you understand the content and give you further ideas. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to more exciting information coming your way in February in regard to advanced essentialization for math, and in March, advanced essentialization examples across the complexity levels in ELA, and that would be for math and ELA. So we'll see you next time.